Gentlemen, we're now at the point in the programme when the chairman will deliver his toast to the memory of Robert Burns. However, before that, I must firstly introduce him. This evening, our chairman, David Henderson, will continue an unbroken sequence unique to this club as the 197th chairman. Some clubs may be older, but none can compare as to a record of continuous suppers. So it is with great pleasure that I now introduce him to the members and guests. By the way, those of you who may have been paying attention to this last year may find the following familiar. For that, I apologise, but you can't rewrite history. For those who haven't heard it or have fallen asleep, I can only ask for your indulgence. Like many of us here this evening, he was born in Buckridden Hospital in Kilwinning. He was born in a momentous year, 1967, when Celtic became the first Scottish team or British team to win the European Cup, and Scotland thrashed the world champions England 3-2 at Wembley. David grew up in Kilwinning and was educated at Abbey Primary School before moving on to Kilwinning Academy. From an early age, he appeared to be drawn towards the local hostelries, such as the Claremont Hotel, the Alton Bar, and last but not least, that Paragon for the discerning imbiber, the Winton Arms Hotel. You could get in with any colour as long as it wasn't green. For a period of time, Kilwinning became the butt of many an article in the Glasgow Herald as to the IQ or otherwise of sections of the population. I put no stock in this to suffice to tell the story about a pub quiz in the Winton, where they were asked to name a fish beginning with C. Tuna was the answer put forward. Correct, said the quizmaster. I rest my case. Fortunately, living in Byers Road, he wasn't far from the railway station, and so was able to reach civilised parts of the country like the Rye, where he, along with his brother Stuart, would visit Grandma Henderson, who lived up near the cemetery. Here they would carry out Olympic country pursuits, excuse me, such as fishing for minnows in the Patayan Burn, or more likely catching foot and mouth. Or they would go shooting innocent and maybe not so innocent wildlife at either Blackstone or Windy Edge farms. Leaving school in 1985, David enrolled in Glasgow Tech. Remember those centres of excellence, now no more, where he gained a BA in commerce. His working life began with IBM at the renowned Spango Valley site in Greenock, working in the production control function. Whilst working there, he gained an MSc from Paisley Tech. Now, 30 years later, he still works for the same organisation. How many of us can say that nowadays? Having several different roles, he now manages a team of planners based in Glasgow, Shenzhen in China, and Morrisville in North Carolina in the USA. Travel between sites is restricted just now, but hopefully with the new vaccines available, these can resume in the not too far distant future. Perhaps the Chinese massage can be resumed. On the sporting front, other than shooting things, David's main love was rugby. He began playing at school and then moved on to Irvine Rugby Club, where they had some success moving up through the leagues. He finally retired after playing for 23 years, minus some teeth and several dislocations of the shoulder. However, he still turns out a couple of times a year for the Legends against other old crop teams. Thought they might have learned some sense by now. I've also discovered he visited Glastonbury Music Festival. Perhaps a veil should be thrown over that. He also attended an Ezzy Izzard show in Troon Town Hall. Was dressing up involved? Perhaps a veil should be thrown over that as well. David met his wife Alison at school, and they dated through the years until they virtually eloped to Mull in 2002 and were finally married. It shows how well planned the operation was when they had to rope in a receptionist and a council gardener to act as witnesses. The gardener also became the official photographer. Perhaps the person most relieved with the arrangement was Alison's dad. He got off with paying for a wedding. They finally saw sense and left Kilwinning and now live in Dalry with their dog Eric and a yellow VW camper van. David joins a growing list of sons following fathers to the chair. His father, Tom, was chairman in 1987, the year David attended his first supper. I wish him well, that he may carry out his duties of his office with enthusiasm and humour throughout these trying times. He is following in the footsteps of many notable characters who have enhanced this fine old club. Gentlemen, welcome your chairman, Mr. David Henderson.
Thank you, Jack. Mr. Croupier, gentlemen, time, like an ever-rolling stream, bears all its sons away. They fly forgotten as a dream. They die at the opening day. Now, these lines are from a hymn written by Isaac Watts and serves to remind us how transitory is our earthly being before all too soon we are whisked away to join the withered leaves of time. Once in every 1,000 years or so, however, there flickers into flame a light that does not dim or die, is not snuffed out, but burns brightly, ever more brightly, until it fills the whole world with the brilliance of its light. Such a light was and is the sheer genius of our national bard, whose natal day we are celebrating here this evening. When one considers the tremendous torrent of words that are written and spoken about the bard at this time, is it not a tribute to his durability, versatility, and staying power that when the last word has been spoken, the last song sung, and the last toast drank, he emerges unscathed, his crown untarnished, his star shining more brightly than ever before. And that is why I have chosen the word genius as the theme of my toast here tonight. To commemorate the birth of a man who has given to posterity good ideas, if not necessarily high ideals in his personal life, as well as a sense of perspective within the broader community. Now, from the Latin, we were talking about Latin early on, we were told that genius is an attendant spirit of song and verse, an inclination or an appetite, and that it rarely means intellectual capacity. Now, this comes as a surprise to me, that genius rarely means intellectual capacity. When we think of someone as a genius, we usually assume that he is an egghead with an IQ of 150 plus. Although the bard, through the offices of his father, did briefly attend that high altar of learning that's called Ayr Academy, 2 weeks in all, and there is no doubt that he was obviously alert to his environment and intelligent with it, but there is no recorded proof that he was indeed an intellectual giant. So, what does qualify our bard as a genius? I think the definitions of appetite and inclination are much more appropriate. For an inclination with Tam O'Shanter and Suitor Johnny, it wasn't sitting boozing at an appy. And for an appetite at Pussy Nancy's, it wasn't to envy a crown, but for some comfort and a mow, which most definitely qualifies the bard for genius status in my book. Lucky lad. Now, from the Greek, genius means to be born or to be gat. And I would agree that in these stakes the bard did not appear to be overly handicapped, judging from the number of acknowledged and unacknowledged offspring which were in evidence during his short life. 12 in all, by 4 different mothers. The meaning, attended spirit, allotted to every person at their birth, is their conscience. Every man has a conscience, whether he likes it or not. And the attendant spirit was always with the bard, and he would point out hypocrisy wherever he saw it. Or would some the power the gift to gie us, to see ourselves as others see us. It would, fae, money or blunder free us from lousy luck, no doubt. Which tells us that he had a keen sense of community. and no high exalted virtuous dames, or the rigidly righteous casting judgment on their brother man, could escape his genius eye. Sometimes a spirit can be a demon, which brings to mind, "With Tippany will fear no evil, with Scabay will face the deal." Now, you've got to remember, the suitor always tells the queerest tales, right enough. Now, much has been reported about the bard's excesses both in drink and in women, but in that age where, without the doubtful benefits of the internet and mass media, what other entertainment was available other than a dram, or maybe a stroll, or even a roll among the corn rigs? The fact that in 1787, 235 years ago, aged 28, 29, the bard wrote "Bonnie Dundee, a bottle and a friend, and a rosebud by my early walk," in which he chronicles war, whining, and women. This clearly shows that as a spirit in general, he qualifies for the name of genius. A third definition of inherent tendency or bent. Now, this takes us closer to the man's real character. He had a bent or a leaning towards the fact that all men should have the opportunity to realise their potential ability, and that every man is worthy of recognition and acknowledgement, which did not mean that every man was acceptable in his company. When he says, "A man's a man," he is stating that we should all be recognised as such. But when he adds, "for all that," is he telling us that for all that he means despite all their shortcomings? What seems beyond doubt is that our bard had a social conscience and cared passionately about liberty, equality, and universal human rights. But see yon Burkie Cod a Lord, I'm sure he had his doubts about their honesty and uprightness. So he's not making a blanket statement that everyone is worthy. I've been speaking about the equality of men, but what of the 18th century attitudes towards women? So gently scan your brother man, still gentler sister woman. Now, gentlemen, here is the one flaw in our genius. He did not take into account, and as Rudyard Kipling pointed out in his poem, "The female of the species, there are more deadly and much longer lived than the male." 200 years ago, women had to graft just as hard as the men, yet on average, they still outlived the males. They worked in the fields, bore children, washed and cooked. Still, nowadays we sometimes refer to women as the weaker sex, but their loveliness clearly shows they are in fact the gentler sex. Bonnie Jean outlived the bard by 30 years. The bard died aged 37. Death, the poor man's dearest friend, called time early on our genius sage and his independent desires. The ability to recognise beauty and quality without formal training is surely one of the greatest gifts that a man can possess. The ability to see when the rest of us merely look is the true mark of a genius. The last time we had a moose in the house, it wasn't a question of wee, sleek-it, coorn, timorous beastie, but we've got vermin in the house, and as the man of the house, you'd better do something about it. Or when a few daisies push up amongst the dandelions, all have to be scarified without any mention of wee modest crimson tip flower. Can it be that romance in the soul is an element of genius? The difference between how the bard looked at two of the simplest species of fauna and flora, the moose and the daisy, and how the average man looks at them, is a difference between a genius and ourselves. The last definition of genius is native intellect, imaginative creation, and original thought, which are epitomised in Tam O'Shanter. In April 1791, in a letter to Mrs. Dunlop, the bard said, announcing the birth of his third son, William Nicol Burns, "I look upon him as my chef d'oeuvre, masterpiece in that species of manufacture, as I look upon Tam O'Shanter as my standard performance in the poetical line, 'tis true, both the one and the other discover a spice of roguish waggery that perhaps he is well spared, but then they also show, in my opinion, a force of genius and finishing polish that I despair of ever excelling. Now, he felt that in Tam O'Shanter he had reached his pinnacle. So the bard, in his own words, has given me the theme of this toast, which is to genius. Gentlemen, will you charge your glasses and join me in the toast? I shall name his name but once. The toast I propose is to Robert Burns.